Hello, Malaysia, Thailand, and followers around the world. I'm Chun Wai. Welcome to the latest edition of my Facebook chat. We're here tonight is Dr. Titipol Phakdeewanich, the Dean of the Political Science Faculty at the Ubon Rathchathani University. I hope I got it right.
Yeah.
Dr. Titipol is a very well-respected academician and is an advocate of democracy, human rights, and he's well known for fighting for the defranchised, the rural poor, so that they can improve their lives. Thailand is going through a very interesting time now. Besides fighting against the pandemic, it is also going through a turbulent time where the street protests since August involving the students' movement seems to have moved on to a new level. It has suddenly talking about reforms in the monarchy, talking about changes in the constitution, and some observers feel that they may have crossed the line. And that we hear Dr. Titipol, who has been watching the situation closely. He's really an interesting character because that he has been monitored by the authorities for a while because of his involvement and because of his outspokenness on human rights. And that interestingly, besides as a lecturer in a Thai university, he obtained his postgraduate studies from the prestigious University of Warwick in UK. So we're indeed happy to have you here. Sawadee Krap, thank you for coming. Let's get down to the point, Dr. Titipol. What's happening now? Why has the student movement moved on to a new level since August and now?
Thank you for having me here. But when you look at the current movement, especially from what happened at Thammasat University, and people went excited about the number, and some media said there were about 10,000, some said 20,000, and at the Thammasat. Oh, and actually, sorry, I'm the one in Bangkok as well, and quite a large number. But then when we look at this, partly because of suppression throughout the COVID, that suspended all political movement in the country. When you look at this, I would say that this movement of young people in the country started after the dissolution of the Future Forward Party, which was the new party that entered election in 2019. And this party was the hope for young generation. But after election, the military remained in power, and the prime minister is still the very same person who actually staged a coup in 2014. That was a kind of big disappointment for young generation. So after the suspension throughout the COVID period, and then things become more relaxed. So there are more opportunity for this generation who are not happy with the government to come out, to speak out against the government, to express their demand. And so this is what we can see, the trend that has been kind of escalating and in Thailand, and especially when we see when we saw the movement at the Constitution Monument in Bangkok, which around 10 to 20,000 people gathered in the past few days. And
Dr. Titipol, what are the reasons that the young people could identify with the party that was has been banned? Is it because of the leader? If I'm not mistaken, his name is Thanakorn, right?
Thanakorn, yes. Yeah.
Is it because that his credentials, the tools that he picked, beside his appearance, he's a good-looking guy? Is it because that what are the issues that the young could identify with this party?
Yeah, I think Thanakorn, the leader of the party, is the only one reason that motivated this generation to come out. But partly because of the ideology and of the party, and how party was actually started up, that was trying to include new generation. So with this generation who are growing up, they feel more connected with this party because this party is more liberal than many other parties. And in Thai politics, like the Democrat Party has never been supporting democracy, and which is very disappointing for young generations. So many young people see this as a kind of hope when the Future Forward Party started up. So they thought it was a kind of new hope for them and to change the way politics has been in the country. And they want to ensure that Thailand become a real liberal democratic country. And that I think that is one of the main reasons, not just because of the person himself, but of course, Thanathorn has been a kind of quite influential figure that motivate young generation to take part in the political movement of the party, especially in the last election in 2019, when I actually went out to observe in Sisakhet province nearby my province. And I was surprised that when I saw young high school students, and they were not actually entitled to vote in 2019. And they said they wanted to support this party. So then they campaigned for the party to convince old generation to vote for new voices into the parliament. So basically, young generation want change in this country for a better Thailand.
How widespread are these protests? Are they merely confined to Bangkok, or have they spread on to other parts of Thailand? And are these protests merely involves the university students, or as I have read somewhere, that the college students and the older students are from say in in older ones are involved now?
Yeah, when you look at the startup of this movement after COVID period, and they use the hashtag called like in Thai Yawachon Protect, which means like young people free Thailand, that kind of thing. So I think at the beginning they were trying to show that this is a kind of movement of young people, and their hashtag went on Twitter, and that was actually when like hundreds of thousands, even a million hashtags on theirs. And I think they are aware of the movement that if they want to maintain momentum, they can't just keep it for young people, because many people are not very happy with the governments as well, not just young generations. So last week, what we have seen, I think that was a kind of a change in their strategy, because they changed the hashtag from young, like Yawachon Protect, young people for free Thailand, to be Prachachon Protect, which means perhaps like people for free Thailand. So that kind of change in strategy and help them to include different generations, like older generation as well, to take part, as we saw in the protest in Bangkok. And the other thing that what I think is that um, high school student has also been very active in this movement as well. So we can't say it's just for university students and younger generation who are going to vote in the next elections, especially if you look at, if I predict in this, if the government stay in full term for 4 years, so we will have about 3 million voters enter next election. So it's a kind of hope for the country to change. And with this young generation, they also embrace the kind of various of issues that has never been political issues in Thailand. For example, LGBT issues, and they kind of make it more strong. You know, like if you look at US or UK politics, LGBT has always been political issues, or abortion has also been like political issues in the US. But in Thailand, people just talk about it. They have never been politicized. But with this movement, I think there are more hope for the country, because with young generation, they can see what actually affects them. Or actually, yesterday we had another protest in Bangkok by high school students in front of Ministry of Education. And this student, they gather and they actually call themselves นักเรียนเลว best student. It's like they put it on, and to show that they are not happy with the system. is constructed. They want reform. And so this kind of movement, I think, is kind of show that we have a future for democratic progress.
Dr. Titipol, the report says that the student movement protest that's going on now do not seem to have any particular leader, but yet it seems to be pretty organized, and some will even say that it's pretty well financed. At the protest at Thammasat University, there was a light and sound show, and that some felt that who's paying for this protest?
Everyone is questioning that, and I also questioned when I first saw the stage at Thammasat University because it was very well organized, and it's almost like a concert. And I don't have a problem with the the format. Some people said, "Oh, protest can't be like this," but if you want to include this generation, you have to organize something that make them feel that they want to participate in. But when we look at the money, many people are still investigating on this. But many of the protesters said that they also have small donors who actually give money to them because they open account and they actually put account on their Facebook and their social media, their Twitter. And I would say at this stage, we can say that some of the money that they use has been using from actually small donors. And we cannot underestimate this because quite a large number of Thai who also want to support student movements as well. And I don't think it is easy for like the opposition, like Future Forward Party, or now as we call Move Forward Party, or Thanathorn to easily into this. Because if they did, they would have been a cut evidence and it was not politically good for them as well. And not good for the movement too, because they might be in trouble or being demonized by the pro-government or the military government.
There was some suggestion that the loosely organized Milk Tea Alliance, comprising of Thailand, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, was even perhaps funded by the US agencies, and that they see similarities. Thanathorn was studying in Hong Kong University, and that he was also closely associated with Joshua Wong, who leads the protests in Hong Kong. How effective has this alliance been, the Milk Tea Alliance? Do they actually surface in Thailand?
I think it's a loosely formed multi-alliance, and I think it's a good way to keep the world informed. But I don't think it's a kind of, I would say that as a form of intervention. But like when they work together with Hong Kong people, and then because now if the news spread out of the country, so that the world can actually understand what is actually happening in the country. I think I see it this way. So it's good to build up this alliance. And because actually with I'm not sure they mentioned about the movement in Thammasat or in Bangkok that went on top hashtag in Hong Kong as well. So it's good to ensure that the world are actually watching and listening to what is happening in Thailand. But when you look at the you just mentioned about the US support in Hong Kong. I wouldn't see this as a form of intervention. Wherever money is from, if the money is meant to support democracy or democratic movement, I think it's good for the country if the country said that the country wants to be a democratic country. So why is that a problem? Because when the money is from either from Japan, from America, or from the Thai government to support democratic process, then it's meant for democracy, for freedom of the people. But I think the Chinese government and Thai government have the same mentality. So, when, because if you look at the nature of democratic movement in Thailand or in Hong Kong, I think it's not easy to get support from the government themselves. And the Thai government don't actually have much money to support democratic movement. Because they see democratic movement as a threat to to their power, especially now we have the military in charge, so that um, it's not easy to get funding from the government. And the US doesn't normally give money to this group anyway. So they just have like provide some kind of what I say that like USAID project, they have democracy program that actually go through, not go directly to the movement.
Dr. Titipol, as seen the most of the political landscape in whether in Malaysia or in Thailand, the rural area has always been easier for the establishment or the government to take care of them. And that the political sympathies have always been with the ruling establishment. In Thailand, I'm sure that the strong political personalities, they will have a hold over the rural areas. You have been traveling areas of Thailand. How receptive are they to this student protest?
Yes, I think after the protest, because actually there was another protest, so many protests now, and um, at the beginning, like I said, they were just trying to do it like for young people. And I think when they did this student did the speech at Chulalongkorn University, which is one of the leading university in Thailand, and one of the speakers actually said thank you to the Red Shirt, which was protested in the past. And the Red Shirt are basically rural population in the country, and they support the Prathai Party. And one of the student protester at Chulalongkorn University said thank you for the Red Shirt who started up the protest. And I think that was also another significant moment to include rural population and who were politically active in the past. And now, but I would say that the current situation of the process, it would not escalate to a big scale because the government is still suppressing. Like today and yesterday, we have seen more arrests of like politically active students and young people who participated in the movement. So, but we can see the expansion or to make this movement more inclusive for different demographic groups, and especially outside provinces, outside Bangkok, in the provinces as well.
What would be the size of the electorate, the voters in the rural areas? How many percent, maybe?
Quite a large number, because in election, if you want to win the house, like especially you have to win like northeastern regions of the country. That is where the provinces that actually where I am based in. And then if you, because like they have more seat in in northeastern and the north, and so it's like rural population are still quite important for election to win.
How do families react to this kind of protest? I've read reports that families are split. The older parents feel that the young ones should not cross the line. They have gone too much. They have talked about the monarchy institutions. They have talked about reforms in the royal houses, which are taboo subjects, and there are laws governing that area. And most people are quite careful in Thailand when they talk about the subject. Are families split over dinner? You know, you have gone too much. You should stop it. Like what happened?
I heard a lot about this actually when residents said like about the disagreement within the families, and because like in the past few protests, many people argue that the protesters crossed the lines in terms of their comments about the monarchy. And because we also have the criminal code article 112, less-major law in the country as well. And students have, or young people have been warned to be careful of being violating this article. But in family, and I would say that all generation, even the former red shirt who participated in the protest, are still worried, and many want their children to take part in the protest. Because like in the protest that I observed in Ubon Rathchathani, and I asked why they didn't actually go into the actual protest themselves, young generation. And they said, oh, because if I went in, my parents might see me on Facebook, Twitter. And so they cannot take part just because their parents don't want them to get involved, but not because their parents don't want them to support democracy, but because of the safety and security that are primary concern for the family. But some argue that, they can't even talk within the family.
Wow.
But this is quite a common thing. I think we might have seen, we have seen this before, and when we had a big fight between the red shirt and yellow shirt.
If I'm not mistaken, the area where your university is located, it is supposed to be known for the red shirt supporters. Is that correct?
Red shirt, yeah. And it's in northeastern part of the country where the former part where the Pheu Thai party, which by Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, is now out of the country, and Yingluck Shinawatra, his sister. And in this area and in these provinces, the Pheu Thai has a stronghold. But in the previous in the election in 2019, things changed a bit because Parang Pracharat party got quite a few seats from here as well, from this region, I mean. But partly because the former Pheu Thai MP moved to Parang Pracharat, and because the Parang Pracharat party is supporting the military. And it was, I think, quite a caption that the military would be in power because they have the 250 senators to vote for prime minister. And so when we look at the kind of electoral system in Thailand, it hasn't been fair at the beginning. I mean, when you look at the 2019.
For the benefit of our followers from around the world, could you recap a bit what do we mean when we talk about the red shirts? So the rest of the followers could be talking about.
The red shirt, they actually basically are defined as supporter of Pheu Thai party, which is the party that started up by Thaksin Shinawatra, who is now on exile outside Thailand. And he started the party called Thai Rak Thai first, and then after the coup in 2006. And then the party was dissolved and it changed quite a few names. And now the name is Pheu Thai Party. And they actually took part, the red shirt took part in the protest in 2010, and that was quite in Bangkok as well before the big protest in 2014 by the PDRC that actually led to the coup and allowed the current prime minister to take power.
What are the constitution's changes that the students would like to see take place?
Yeah, basically, when you look at a demand for rewriting the constitution or to amend the constitution, basically the very main thing people want the clause that allow 250 senators to be appointed and to have power to vote for prime minister, because this section was written to ensure that the military would be in power after election. I mean, when we had election in 2019, and then because 250 senators have been elected, sorry, not elected, have been appointed by the coup maker. So what can you hope for that? If they were appointed by the coup maker, how can they not vote for the coup to be a prime minister, the coup leader to be a prime minister? And this is what people are not very happy with. And then this is the main of this section from the constitution is what make Thailand more democratic. So if you win election, then you can be in government. But now, because winning election is not a guarantee that you can be a government, because you still need vote from the Senate.
Doctor, when we talk about constitutional reforms, when we talk about institutions, these are big words. For the men in the street who's struggling to, what does this protest means to them? How does it connect to them?
Yeah, it's true. I agree with that. And because especially after COVID, people talk about the state of economy, and then it's hard to put this as a high priority for everyone in the country. And because many people just don't, like when we are talking here, because like I see the problem in the country because as a political scientist. But if you go to talk to people like in at Faculty of Science or Engineering, they wouldn't see it's a problem. Things like normal. So this is the problem of Thailand. We have to raise the awareness of people that politics affect everyone. And actually, yesterday's student movement, I think the student was actually very good at expressing their opinion, because I just watched his interview. He gave TV interview a day before he went to protest. And he said that the education minister said that, oh, you are young, you are high school student, focus on your study and leave politics to adults or to politicians. And his argument is a thing that the government and Thai adults should actually learn. He said that, how can you say this to me? Politics is not part of us. I am a student, but after 4 or 5 p.m., I'm ordinary people. I use transportation in Bangkok and it affects me. And education system also affects us. So who actually take responsibility on educational reform? So it's government. So how can we not take part in politics? So this is a thing that the awareness of the people. I think this young boy should actually speak to the country, to the rest of the country, to ensure that everyone is aware of the impact of politics on their life.
Given the difference of the man in the street, and that how do you think that this protest would sustain? Would it be able to continue for a while, or you think that at some point it will just die out, like what has happened in Hong Kong because of the strong hand tactic by the authorities? Where do you think it will lead to at this point?
Yeah, at this point, I think it's not easy to see the escalation of this protest to the size that we have seen in Hong Kong, I would say. But there might be opportunity for the momentum to stay for a while, but it's not that hopeless for Thailand. But because this movement started up, and it's actually try to embrace all kind of issues, like I said, that this protest actually has been politicizing many issues that has never been political issues, LGBT, the abortions, or even the rights of students or young people in the country. And so with this generation, they are growing up, so that when they are more politically aware, then they are assumed by the authority. Because currently, when you look at the protest, the government still question whether they were actually mobilized or misled by some big businesses or some opposition party. And I think that is so wrong with this perception. And it's just a very Thai perception, when people speak out, then, oh, it must be something behind that. And we have to start to believe that this movement are real and young people are genuine. So when come back to your question, when you ask whether it would die down, and it could, it's possible, but it doesn't mean the end of change, because the momentum might go through their mindset, because when they grow up, and this thing the government cannot easily stop.
There seems to be some degree of restraint by the authorities. There have been some arrests, but there has been no mass arrests. There has no brutality been used against the students, and that even the palace has been quite measured in their tone. So it would seem from an external point of view that it seems to be pretty restrained. And why do you think that the authorities are holding back? They are not overreacting to these students?
Yeah, I would say it's quite a level of like suppression in the country. And nothing changed in the coup in 2014. But I think this government, or I would call them the coup maker group, because like we still have the same prime minister who staged the coup, and they learn from the past, and they know when to pull the string, and they don't arrest everyone, and they know when to push it. And I think they are fully aware of the situation. If there is a confrontation like what we have seen in 1970s, or the May unrest in Thailand, when there was another confrontation in Bangkok and people died, and that if this kind of thing happened in 2008, it would mean the end of their power. And they never want that to happen, because they want to be accepted by the international community as well. So this is the thing that I think they try to ensure that their strategy to maintain the high level of fears and intimidations to protect their power. But I don't think they would easily go that far to confront with the student.
Thank you all for spending time with us. Things are still unfolding in Bangkok and other parts of Thailand. There are a lot of things that's been shaping up in Thailand. We do not know where it will go from here, as Dr. Titipol told us. But definitely Thailand is a place that we want to look at, and that since it's so close to Malaysia, and in fact it's our neighbor, and Dr. Titipol, we hope to see you back here with us again. Please let us have the privilege of hearing from you what will happen in Thailand in the future. Thank you, Doctor, and to all our followers in Thailand, in Malaysia, and around the world. Please join us again. Thank you very much. Khap Khun Krap, and we hope to see you again. Thank you so much.